church, and the church that you lead and the churches that you've led for what's getting to be a long time now. What are the characteristics of elders that you've seen God use in your church?
Well, before I answer that, I want to just say one thing to the audience specifically, because you just made a really important distinction between the official role of elder in a church, and the role of eldering in terms of just a person who is qualified to function as an elder in multiple places, whether it's a home, business, mentoring, or the church. And Regi, you should know, for me, has done both. Regi's been both an official elder in our church, part of our stewardship team, and yet at the same time, you have eldered me personally, not in an official capacity, but because of what you just bring in terms of life experience. And so I think this is a really important distinction we're talking about, and I think you're the person to lead the discussion, because you have functioned officially as both, not just at our church, but at other places as well. So anyway, in terms of characteristics, I wrote down, I created a sentence, so I'm going to read you my sentence, and we can just dissect this if you want, or we can move on to the next question. I wrote, an available, humble, agenda-free listener who knows how to ask good questions. So I'll repeat that. An available, which is important, humble, which, you know, the people who think they're humble aren't, and those that don't think they are. But anyway, available, humble, agenda-free, and you mentioned that just a minute ago, the issue of an agenda, which would be fun to talk about. Listeners who know how to ask good questions. Now, there's obviously more. There's wisdom, there's life experience, and all those things. But in terms of the specifics that takes a person with vast, experience and wisdom that really, I think, drops them into this very important role of elder, I think those are the things as I think about personally and in an official capacity within the context of a local church. So which one of those things would you like to talk about first, or at all?
I guess the challenging part for most of us older guys who have some of those characteristics are when to initiate and when to respond.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard for guys who think they know something to keep their mouths shut.
Yeah.
And yet sometimes initiating can be destructive, not constructive.
Yeah, and within the context of the local church, this really gets tricky. In fact, I mentioned to you earlier, in 1 Timothy, Paul talks about it's a good thing to aspire to be an elder. And I think sometimes men in particular, and what this conversation is going to focus on men, so we'll just say that. Men in particular sometimes who have approached me and have desired to be an elder, on one hand I'm thinking, well, that's what the New Testament says, but on the other hand, the guys that want it the most scare me the most. And the thing that I love, both in terms of personal mentorship and an official capacity in the church, and I've had two big examples of this in the last couple of years, is when I've approached them about being an elder in our church, the guys that are surprised, Dave Wills. I remember when I first approached David Wills about being an elder in our church, and he looked at me surprised and he said, well, I'll consider it, but what do you think I have to offer? And I thought, your response is the reason I need you to be an elder in this church, because it's the men in particular who really have the goods, who really fit the description. Along with that, there is a bit of a hesitance to step into an important role like this. The guys that are itching to do that, they scare me a little bit. And I think part of it is, going back to the characteristics, an elder knows how to listen, and an elder knows how to ask great questions. And you, in my life, and even in an official capacity as an elder, have modeled that tremendously. And I'd love to tell a story in a few minutes if we have time. But the ability to listen and to ask questions is the opposite of a person that feels like they have all the answers, waits for everyone to quit talking so they can talk. And in the role of elder, it's such an important distinction. And as you said, it's not leadership. Leadership is, we need to make a decision. So as a leader, I have to decide, when have I listened enough and when is it time to talk and take action? But the role of elder is completely different. And so the guy that can gear down the leadership gift and gear up the ability to listen and to ask great questions without a preconceived notion of the answers or an agenda, it's a powerful role, whether it's personal, family, or within the context of the local church.
How have you seen elders add value to the church, to your church?
Well, within the specific context of the official role of elder, lots of ways. I wrote down several, and I've got a couple of great illustrations. One of the things about a person who's really fulfilling the role of elder, again, in the official capacity at church or otherwise, is somebody who has taken time to prepare. So when we send things out ahead of time, they've actually looked at them, they've actually read, they've actually come prepared. But even coming prepared, they don't come with an agenda. One of the guys that we've worked with for years is Bob Bryant. And Bob has been a part of our church for years and years and years. And Bob has fulfilled this role of both the role of elder for me personally, as well as officially. And one of the things that he does that I think is sort of typifies or creates a context for this question is Bob has always been very public. He's been publicly loyal to me. He's been a cheerleader. He's just, he just can't say enough good things about me publicly. But because of that, I take him seriously privately when he brings concerns or questions. And I think this is one of the things that an elder does intuitively. They realize if I'm playing the role of elder in this person's life or within the context of the local church, then publicly I'm going to be a cheerleader. I'm going to be a raving fan. And when that happens, the elder gains the opportunity and I think permission then to speak the more difficult things into a person's life, whether it's, again, a pastor or the individual. So Bob, for example, for years and years he's done this. In our elders' meetings, he is so supportive of our mission and vision. But when Bob has a question or a concern, and about once, sometimes twice a year, he'll call me and say, Andy, I need to come talk to you. And I know it's not going to be positive, but I know it's going to be helpful. And I've always trusted those Andy, I need to talk to you moments because he's a raving fan. He loves our church. He loves me. He is for us. He is so for us, he cannot avoid the difficult questions. And again, it's not an official capacity. It's pure influence. It's 100% influence. But I am wide open to his influence, again, because of this dance he does that you've done as well, where publicly I'm for you, privately I'm going to ask you the tough questions. So I think that's the role, to some extent, of an elder. And I think for the man who's looking to make a major contribution to a local church, that's a big part of it, is somebody who can publicly embrace the direction of the church, but not be afraid to ask those questions. And then the person in my role has to open the door and be available.
Thinking about the guys who are going to be watching this, and they're not elders. They're not official elders in their church. What advice would you give them in terms of how they can add value to their local church, even though they haven't been identified or elected or chosen as official elders?
I could talk about that for a long time because, unfortunately, my dad's a pastor, so I've lived or survived 2 church splits, and I've survived a whole bunch of church plants. I think I've seen the negative. I've seen my dad punched standing in the pulpit, so that's one extreme. And then this past weekend, we just had an incredible weekend as a group of churches where we celebrated a lot of things in a lot of different places. So I feel like I've been on both ends of that. And we can talk about specifics, but the big sort of the macro 30,000 foot answer to your question is anything that encourages a pastor or a staff member, anything that's encouragement, whether it's letters. Some people, you're a note writer. Jeff Henderson's a note writer. In fact, I think you've kind of inspired him to be the note writer he is. Steve Franklin's a note writer. So people who that's their thing, do that. Telephone calls, text messages, but essentially anything that says, I believe in you and I believe in what we're doing. I believe in you, I believe in what we're doing. I believe in you, I believe in what we're doing. At this specific level, it's those notes, it's cards, they really mean a big deal. And people say, oh, Andy, you probably didn't get my note or my card because you get so much mail. I'm like, no, I make sure I get those. And if you were to walk into my office, I have an outer office, and then we're at the conference table, and then I have a study, and between those I have a file room with some books and filing cabinets. And all along those bookshelves, I have taken cards that people have sent me and just leaned them up there. And they're all short cards that were basically, I believe in you and I believe in what we're doing. No one, even somebody at, quote, my level in church world, no one is immune and no one gets beyond the importance of that. Then there's another real specific thing, if I can get down into minutia a bit. One of the things it's lonely to be a senior pastor. You always feel like there's a little bit of tension between you and the people that can help you get where you think the church needs to be. Now, I say always, that may be an exaggeration, but there's just kind of a dance that we do. And gentlemen like you, Regi, and some others have, through the years, so consistently communicated what I just said. Andy, I love you, I'm for your family, I'm for your marriage, I'm for the health of your kids, and I'm for what we're doing, that pastors over time are willing, I think, to open the door and allow people close to them. But that's the avenue as a pastor that people get close. Now, which, if you attend a church and you're really not for the direction of your church and you're not really for the mission and vision of your church, I don't think you should pretend. You probably need to go find another church. But if you are in a church where that's the case, you cannot communicate that enough to your pastor. And then yesterday I was with a group of pretty resourced people at Athens Church, our church in Athens, Georgia. And Sean C. said, Andy, I want you to say something to this group. They're about to launch another capital campaign. And I'll tell you and tell us what I told them, because this is a big deal. I said to that group, if you decide to participate in this capital campaign financially, I want you to tell Sean, and I want you to tell him how much you're going to give. Now, somebody could say, I would probably say, well, that's really not the pastor's business. That's no one's business. That's true in one respect. But if you're asking the question, what can a person do to really encourage a local pastor, that is a big, big deal. Because everyone should have an answer to the question, how do I plan to support my local church financially? I think that's a fair question for everyone. And I think it's a bad habit for pastors to look to see how much people give. I don't ever do that. I don't want to know. But when someone comes along and says, hey, Andy, I'm so excited about this initiative. I want you to know my family and I are doing X. What that says is I'm for you, I believe in what we're doing, and you have just gained access and you've just gained influence to the local pastor. Now that's not a bribe. This isn't if I'll do this, if you'll do something, it's not that. But because the local church is a nonprofit organization, the person that supports the mission and vision of the church financially is really supporting the mission and vision of the pastor personally. And there really is a connection there. So, those are some of the things, and some of the things you may think about that are somewhat intuitive, and maybe a few things that aren't.
You're the first senior pastor that I've ever really gotten to know and be friends with, and one of the things that's been obvious to me, pastors are people too, and I think our friendship...
You might want to repeat that.
Pastors are people too. And I think our friendship started, when you and I first got to know each other, talking about personal things, and really tough personal things that we experience and just as life happens. And I don't think that the typical church member, even elder, has an appreciation for just how difficult it is to be a pastor. In so many ways, though, your life is not your own. And people, we just did a blog post, and there's a plane that's standing in a museum with the wheels on 3 little pedestals, and the byline is, man, that was a heck of a landing. How did he do that? And I almost feel like a pastor has that kind of landing to do every day of his life, not just on Sunday morning. And so the encouragement of those of us who are elders, who might have a little bit of respect or track record or whatever, I think is fuel. Yeah. It's got to be fuel.
Well, and to feel like either in official capacity or unofficial capacity, you're not just there for the benefit of the church. You're really there to support a local pastor. And as selfish as that may sound, because if you're the CEO of your company, you're thinking, well, I don't expect my board to be there for me personally. They're there to make sure the company's solvent and doing well. And if it's not, I'm gone. And there's a time and place for that kind of thinking at a local church, absolutely. But because you're, quote, the head of your organization is also your pastor, it is a different kind of relationship. And it's why, and you just said something really important, you have many times, but when you said that you felt like I was the first pastor you were friends with, it's very difficult oftentimes for pastors to feel like they can have close friends within the congregation, and sometimes it's dangerous. And you know, if you're a church planter, it's one thing. If you parachute into an existing church where everybody has existing relationships and you're brand new and suddenly you're the leader and the pastor, it's even more difficult. So for those of you who are in churches with a relatively new pastor, again, you've been at your church 5, 10, 15, maybe you grew up there 20 years, and a year ago or in the next 2 or 3 years you get a new pastor, they feel so vulnerable because one of the things I always pray for pastors who, again, are in that situation, Joel Thomas, who just left here and went to a church right outside of Phoenix, I told him, I'm going to pray for Jen to have a best friend in your church. Jen is his wife. The pastor's wife's best friend within the local church is an extraordinarily important role, but the average congregant doesn't think that way, and why should they? But again, it's difficult to have best friends in the church, but when you can, it's a powerful, powerful thing. And that best friend is going to be in an eldering role, regardless of how old they are, because a best friend is someone who can speak truth, and yet you know, hey, this is my friend, they've got my back. So all of these roles merge over time.
Well, when I think about an elder being sort of an elder to a group of people, and I see you as 20 years have passed, and now you've become an elder to a group of people who are other pastors. How does that feel?
Yeah, that's, well, you know, again, to go to the principle of this is an important question. Success in any realm of life creates a platform. No matter what you're successful at, every success or every season of success creates a platform. And then, as Christians, we have to see that as a stewardship. And the question is, what do I do with this stewardship of influence? Do I ignore it? Do I pretend like it doesn't matter? Do I hoard it? Or do I ask, hey, God, while people are paying attention to me, and as I say, while people are taking me seriously, because the day will come, they will not take me seriously, and I probably shouldn't be taken seriously. But for the time being, as people take me seriously, what should I do with that influence? And again, as we've talked about on multiple occasions, you can spend 5 minutes with 500 people and have no influence. Or as Tim Elmore says, and I think we both love this quote, more time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact. More time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact. So in this season of my life, I've chosen 3 senior pastors in other churches to be 100% available to. And then within the context of our organization, the group that I'm trying to elder is the group that answers to the group that answers to the group that answers to me. So it's the third tier of leaders, our student pastors, our new communicators. And I feel like that's the group, and it's about eight guys right now. I've had men and women in this group through the years, but I always have a group. And again, I'm not as available to all of our staff as I am to that group, and that's on purpose. And it's because of what Tim taught, it's what's been modeled for me. And I think, again, success gives us influence. What are we going to do with our influence? And the more time we spend with a smaller number of people, ultimately the greater impact we have, which, is what you've given your life to, mentoring and treating, creating mentors, training people to mentor, because that principle is so important.
It's funny, that principle came out when we were in the early stages of North Point. We were trying to get mentoring going, and someone, I won't call his name, had the brilliant idea of trying to create a one-on-one mentoring process in a church that's totally groups focused. So go figure. But
sometimes bad ideas lead to good ideas.
Hey, it's always useful as a bad example.
That's right.
But we took, 300 guys down to Callaway Gardens, and that's when I heard Tim Elmore first say, more time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact. And it changed my life. Absolutely changed my life. It's probably the only thing that I really took away from that weekend, other than the moment when I stood in front of those guys and I said, okay, those of you who would like to have a mentor, please raise your hand. And everybody raised their hand. And I looked at Bob Cox, who's like 65, and I said, not now, Bob. Wait for the next question.
Yeah.
The one when I say, who would like to be a mentor?
Yeah.
But everybody felt that need to be mentored. Who are your mentors?
Well, can I say something about that,
yeah, sure.
that moment, and then I'd love to answer that question. When I was in seminary, Howard Hendricks talked a lot about this. He's gone to be with the Lord. And I left one of his classes feeling a burden I've never gotten over, where I just began to believe then that I was responsible always for the generation of young men that were coming along after me, always. So I've always had a group. Since that, that time in my life, there's always been a group. So I mentored high school students. Then when I was in seminary, it was college students. When I graduated from seminary, it was guys thinking about ministry. It was staff members. And because of, and then when I heard Tim say that, it sort of lit up. It kind of put words around what Dr. Hendricks had taught us. And he would say, men, when I come visit you at your church, I'm not going to ask you how large your church is. I'm going to ask you, where are your men? Where are your men? Where is the group that you're pouring into? So for those of you who think, I'm not spiritual enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not far enough down the road, there is a group coming along behind you. They're just 10 years younger than you, and they need you, and you have enough life experience that you can leverage for the sake of that group. And it's not a matter of being smart enough. It really is a matter of being available, being a good listener, not having an agenda, and again, making your life available to them. And to answer your next question, the mentors that have made the biggest difference in my life, we never had a Bible study, we never had a curriculum. They were just available. And many of you have heard me talk about Charlie Renfro. He just said, hey, I'm available. If you've got questions, I'm available. So we would meet on Tuesday mornings whenever he was in town. And as much as I appreciated the time with Charlie, I never fully appreciated the time with Charlie until I was as old as Charlie was when he did that for me. And I remember being in my early 40s thinking, Charlie was in his early 40s. He was in the same season I'm in with young kids. Life is so busy, and yet he carved out time for me at 6:30 or 7 o'clock on Thursday mornings down at the original House of Pancakes. And it dawned on me, as busy as I am, and as much as I want to use my busyness as an excuse not to be available, that's what he did for me. And it was so motivating for me because I was newlywed. We didn't have any kids. I could get up whenever I wanted and show up whenever I wanted. But wow, it just gave me a whole new appreciation.
Talk a little bit about that, the differentiation between an elder and a mentor. What makes one and one the other?
Yeah, I don't know specifically. I think as we've talked about, the whole idea of an elder, there is a perception of age and wisdom, not an official capacity, more of someone that we would invite in for a season of life, or during a season of our lives when we feel like they can fill our cup, or they can certainly empty theirs. A mentor is generally more of an official capacity. That's more sometimes a curriculum. That's more, hey, read this, let's get together and talk about it. Be here on Tuesdays, be here on Thursdays. And there is definitely a place for both. And I think there's a time in our lives we need both simultaneously. Those men, it's like Bob Bryant. We've never met on a regular basis, but he knows he has access to me because he's an elder. He's an elder personally and in an official capacity. So when he calls, I answer. When he wants to meet, I say yes. At the same time, someone like Charlie, it was every Thursday morning when he was in town, and we were generally talking about something. Those are the oftentimes the context where there is like in the program that you've rolled out so effectively. We're going to read some books together. We're going to read some articles together. That's what I do with my guys that I meet with on Thursday mornings now. So it's two different things. They certainly overlap. But blessed is the man who has both. Blessed is the man who has 2 or 3 men who you have such great respect for. When they step into your life, you take them seriously, and at the same time, there's somebody who is tracking along with you in more of an official capacity. So I think depending on the season of life and depending on our age, to have both is fantastic. And I think everybody listening and watching can play one of those roles in someone's life.
I'll never forget hearing a prayer from Henry Hawley, who was Billy Graham's advanced man, really just a saint of a guy. And he said, he prayed one day, and he said, Lord, take from my hand what you want and give back to me what you need, and or what I need. And what's been amazing to me as I've moved more into this elder stage of life or eldership thing is how God will bless me back, even though you don't start out with the intention of getting anything. Yeah. It's just being who you are and loving and serving. But then you turn around one day and you start getting an email or a card or a text or something from someone who says, wow, you know, God just used you, and here's what's happened, and I thank you, and I think of you as a part of
I
my
can
story.
hear your voice in my head.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Any of those words bring anything to mind?
Well, the reason I think this is an important dynamic is so oftentimes, especially in the role of elder, there is nothing to show for it specifically. It's seeds that are planted. That, in fact, we've both given men great advice they didn't take. And we thought, well, that was a complete waste of time. Why did I spend time with that person? We've seen people drift outside the guardrails and think, well, that was a complete waste of time. It is never a waste of time. That's what I think we've both learned. It's never a waste of time. We don't know what God is doing. We don't know when those seeds, you know, take root and begin to grow. And we've both been doing this long enough and have gotten enough notes and letters, you know, from people we don't even remember them, but somehow we played a significant role in their life, and we're like, I don't remember this person. But again, God's word never returns void, and so it's a different kind of measuring tool. It's not like how we measure success in the marketplace or even in church world. It's, God, I'm going to be faithful. My hands are wide open. I'm going to empty my cup. I'm going to empty my cup. I'm going to empty my cup. Trust that you're going to empty some other people's cups into these people's lives, and I will have played a small role, but maybe not a measurable role. And that's why, you know, I think that's why sometimes people shy away from it. It's not measurable, but it's extremely important. And everybody listening could immediately think of someone in your past other than a parent or grandparent who's played this role in your life in an unofficial capacity, and your life would be poorer without them. And yet, if we were to bring them in and interview them and ask them, what, you know, do you think you played a significant role in your life? They would say, no, we only had 2 or 3 conversations. And yet, you know, oftentimes God uses those conversations. Those are the defining moments in our lives.
How do we inspire men to make what I call the outward turn? And I lived a long time and been around a lot of people in church and outside church. And it's like there's this first stage of Christianity that's, oh, I have the Lord, I have salvation, I have eternal life, I have the Bible, I have my small group, and it's like, how many times did I just say I?
Yeah.
And
I'm fine. Yeah. I'm doing well.
Right. But yet, when you start to look outside yourself and you start trying to follow Jesus in this whole idea of it's not about you, stupid, it's about other people, your life lights up, and you come alive, and you start to get the second half of John 10:10b is, you know, salvation, I have life. But when I start making that outward turn, I have a life abundantly or to the full.
This is the paradox of the Christian life, and Jesus was so clear about this. We are all naturally life preservers, and he said, as long as you preserve your life, you'll have nothing to show for it, because as long as you're all about you, you'll have nothing but you at the end. And Jesus said, the moment you make this turn that you talk about and talk about all the time, which is so powerful, the moment you make that turn and move outside your comfort zone, purpose is always found just across the border of what's in it for me, 100% of the time. Purpose is always found across the border of what's in it for me. Once you do that, that truly is where life is found, because it is only in giving our life away that we have something to show for our lives. You know, at the end of our lives, it's the life that's most hilariously celebrated is the life that was given away. Anyone who's been to a funeral, you've never been to a funeral where people have celebrated selfishness or celebrated self-centeredness. We always celebrate. In fact, the measure of a life is always determined by how much of it was given away, 100% of the time. So Jesus says it over and over and over, and yet, you know, I'm afraid I'm going to lose something. And Jesus said, what you are afraid you're going to lose is the very thing that's going to bring you life. It's by losing that you gain. And this imagery of turning from an insider focus to an outsider focus is exactly the thing that needs to happen. It's not intuitive. In some cases, it's scary. In some cases, we just say, I don't have time. But it really is where life is found. And that's not just a Jesus saying. I think anyone who's followed Christ and taken that seriously would say, I'm never going back. I always want to be able to look and say, there's someone I'm pouring into, there's someone I'm pouring into, because, again, it lights us up. That's where we find life.
That was so powerful in the sermon yesterday to talk about when you hear Clay talking about it's just working on the wall that's in front of you. You know, and when I first started thinking about mentoring in a group context, I didn't know, you know, where are my peeps?
Yep.
Who are these 10,
Yep.
15, 20-year-old people who are behind me? And I just went through my database and picked out names of guys that were in that age frame, sons of friends,
Mm-hmm.
people who'd been in my church, and people that I knew from business, whatever. And I just sent this blind email out to 27 guys and said, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Would you be interested? And so in just that, and some of them actually said yes. And so that started the whole radical mentoring thing that I've been involved in now for 13, 14 years. As an elder or eldership, how do you decide when to get involved, when to step out, and when to stay home?
One of the things that I love to tell guys is at different seasons of life, you have to say no for now, but not forever. No for now, but not forever. The reason I think that we spread ourselves too thin and get involved in too many things is we don't want to say no because we feel like if I say no, I'm saying no forever. And so I say no. You have to learn to say no for now, but not forever. And this is completely determined by the season of life. And so I think when we can realize, okay, I'm saying no to these kinds of relationships or no to these opportunities for now, but the season will come when I'll be able to say yes to those. It kind of frees us up. So to answer your question, for those of you with little kids at home, your primary ministry is your family, your primary ministry is your wife, and so you may have limited involvement in the lives of other people. But again, remember the principle is more time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact. So you can have great kingdom impact, but it's going to be with fewer people than perhaps you're going to be able to have when your kids are teenagers or when you're empty nester. Our kids just are all in college now. I have more time than I've ever had before, and I work more than I've ever worked before, and I have more discretionary time for some of the things that we're talking about now. So it's not no forever, it's no for now, not forever. But in the meantime, finding that one person or those two guys that you can pour into, it is okay to say no to everyone else. So as long as you're kind of in the stream, as long as you're available to someone, you don't have to be available to everyone. And you should never, ever feel guilty about that.
And I think that's one of the key elements of us as someone who aspires to being an elder. Paul talks about raising a family, of having a family that is obedient.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and how do you teach those kids obedience, first to the Lord, to the law, and to be contributing members of society if you're not there? So one of the tweets that I read from you not long ago said that the most important contribution you may make to the kingdom may not be what you do, but someone you raise. So I totally get that. I think that's a good insight. Last question before I scratch my nose. Last question for what advice would you give men who aspire to be elders?
I think to just remember that an elder is someone who's serving someone rather than running something. Eldering is about serving someone, not running something. And certainly in the official capacity of the church, you know, leave running the church to the staff, you know, just elder the staff, you know, elder the pastor, which means that everyone at some level can be an elder. In fact, if you're a baseball coach or a football coach, or you coach, you know, women's softball, you know, or girls softball team or your daughter's softball team, there is a sense in which you are an elder because you are an authority figure who doesn't have actual authority. You are an authority figure who doesn't have actual authority in a volunteer capacity. So in any capacity where you volunteer, you are functioning as an elder. The question is, how are you going to use that influence? And so I think in every season of life, at every stage of life, we have the capacity to do this. But it really is about serving someone rather than running something. And as long as there's that distinction, I think the channels of influence continue to expand. And ultimately, it's really where we make our greatest contribution. Because I think as all of us think back and ask who has made the greatest contribution to our lives, very few of us would say it's someone we worked for and it's because we worked for them. It may have been someone you worked for, but it wasn't the professional relationship. It was them kind of getting out of the chair of being the boss and stepping into your life personally. It's always the personal connection that makes the difference, which means we all have the capacity, we all have the potential. It's just a matter of making ourselves available, being a good listener, leave our agendas at the door, and keeping our hands wide open.